welcome Senator Udall, who's just down the street. And uh, I want to kind of situate us, and then I have the honor of introducing you. Uh, some of us know you well, but we are kind of a community from around the country, around the world at this point. So just to situate us a bit, this is our Wednesday night Dharma talk. And so there's many of us, as we do each week, coming together on YouTube. And then there's about 200 of us on Zoom together who have just begun this year-long journey of kind of engaging in the question of what does it mean to meet this world, these times, through the lens of practice, through the wisdom and compassion that we generate in our practice, this socially engaged Buddhist training we've begun. So we're coming together tonight, and we have the great pleasure to have Senator Udall with us. There's a lot to say, obviously. The Senator's been in politics his whole life. You were just telling us about your first campaign when you were 5, which was your father's campaign, but holding a sign for him. And I resonate with that. My mom was Jerry Brown's campaign manager when I was 7, when he ran for president. And the campaign headquarters were down the street from my school. So I'd walk from school to the campaign headquarters and sleep there most nights. So when you grow up in it, it's really in your blood. But just to say a bit of your incredible years as a public servant. You were our Attorney General here in New Mexico for 9 years, for 8 years, from 91 to 99. And then Senator Udall was first. Congressman Udall went to Congress in 99, representing the 3rd District here in New Mexico. And then after 10 years, migrated over to the upper chamber and has served in the Senate for the last 12 years. So that's 20 years in Congress, and a lot has happened during his 20 years in Congress. I think it's worth noting that he's been an incredible champion of the environment that whole time, environmental stewardship. The Sierra Club has given him kind of their highest honor. He's also co-sponsored the Green New Deal and countless pieces of environmental legislation. He's been a champion of Native American rights and sovereignty, alongside always representing the kind of most vulnerable populations in the country. And dear to my heart, you've kind of always kept at the forefront the importance of structural change, of democratic reform, HR 1, campaign finance reform after Citizens United. And I was just watching your farewell speech on the floor of the Senate, and you made this kind of stirring, forceful remark that the Senate's broken. And you said, "We're becoming better and better political warriors, but our peacemaking skills are atrophying. Unfortunately, the structures we've built reward us for hurting one another. We need to reform these structures." I think we all resonate with that and wonder, how do we do that? And so you also spoke just at the beginning, movingly, about the importance of community and of relationship, that's really the backbone of being in social change work together. And our talk last week by Natalie Goldberg, also a neighbor, was on that subject, with the importance, the kind of radical importance of building community. And so I just want to say, I'm so grateful to have you in this community. And I've seen you and Jill come into the Zendo now and again over the past years, and I've just hoped it's been a useful respite from the kind of unyielding work in Washington. And I'm really honored that you're here during this period just after leaving Washington. I imagine a period of rest and reflection to share the evening with us. So thank you so much, Senator. And before I give the floor to you, I'm going to give the floor to Roshi to say a few words.
Goes on. Thank you so much. Only to say I'm so grateful that Tom is going to speak with us tonight about public service being a path. that the world of politics wants to be repopulated by people like Senator Udall. And my deep respect for all you have done in so many domains, and also that you are a contemplative. You're a Buddhist practitioner. And this is really important to us to understand that being socially engaged, being politically engaged is not separate from your practice or from practice. So thank you.
Thank you. Now, Noah told me that maybe there was going to be a chant, or am I ready to go?
Noah? I think you can go, Tom.
I think you can jump right in.
Okay, great. Well, thank you both. Thank you, Kozan, and thank you, Roshi Joan, for those wonderful introductory remarks. Sometimes you hear such wonderful introductory remarks, you say, how am I going to live up to that? Maybe the best thing to do is leave, and then they can see other things and look at you in a different kind of way. But I can't thank you enough for supporting me being here. Noah, I don't have a staff anymore. I kind of have this thing called staffitis, where you actually are paralyzed because the menial tasks were always done by staff and you're unable to do them. And the great example is you go out and sit in the back seat of a car and you're kind of surprised that it isn't taking you to your destination. So Noah helped me with getting organized tonight. Jill, my wonderful wife, has stepped in and been an incredible staff person for me this last month or so since I've been out. But let me just start finish with the thank yous there, and just start and give you a little bit of some background on how I got into this and where I'm coming from. So then when I talk about the greater issues, that you have a little bit of an idea. First of all, this is our Sangha here. We feel very deprived in a way that we haven't been able to come to the Zendo and we fully understand, but we haven't been able to come because of the COVID-19 crisis that our country faces and our community faces here. And so we really miss that very much. Part of the origination of my practice started back, and Jill was with me on a weekend, maybe 15, 16 years ago. I was in the House of Representatives, and Thich Nhat Hanh came from Plum Village over in France to do a mindfulness retreat, is what it was titled. And we spent a weekend with him and all the wonderful people that traveled with him. We meditated, we silent guided, we did walks, we went to our room and were there in just respectful meditation. And I came away from that wanting to learn more about it and to try to practice every day for at least 20 minutes. And I've tried to do that faithfully. I can't tell you that every single day it's been there, but I'm very committed to it, and I very much believe that this is something that's important for me, and I know it's important for a lot of people around the world. And just recently, many of you may know, Thich Nhat Hanh moved back to Vietnam. He was barred because he, as a monk, got in the middle of the war and started taking positions trying to bring people into a peaceful settlement of the war the United States was in. And he was barred from the country for 40 years. And he had a stroke, and he's come back to Vietnam, to the original place he was. And we got to visit him in Vietnam. We got to visit him in Vietnam on a trip with Patrick Leahy. And they told us, oh, just expect a few minutes and he will, he's trying to be respectful in where he is. and he'll take a picture. But he spent an entire hour with us, and it was a pretty moving experience. So that's part of the background. The other part I wanted to talk a little bit about is how I got into this. I know Joan and Roshi, Joan, and I've talked about this a lot. And I grew up from the time I was 5 years old in a political family. My grandfather had on his pioneer home a little embroidery, and that embroidery said, it said, if good people don't get into public service or to politics, a lot of people use the terms interchangeably, then the scoundrels will take over. And sometimes when I say that publicly, people say, oh, they haven't taken over already? I thought they had. But the point here is that public service is so much a part of our country and our democracy. And it's incredibly important that I think we all engage. And when you hear me use the term public service, when I'm talking tonight, I have the broadest, just imagine the broadest possible definition of public service, because I think what we're talking about is any compassionate action. This is my broad definition. Any compassionate action that moves the world to a better place. So I'm not just talking about people like me that have this passion for running and they get into elective office, and I've served now 30 years, and I'm trying to see if there's another chapter for me, which is going to be very exciting. But when I talk about public service and engagement, I want everyone that's listening to feel that you can be a public servant, and I think most of you are. I don't have any doubt about this, just knowing Roshi, Joan, and the people that are attracted here. So with that, let me jump into what I've done in my public service arena. And part of that, sometimes we ask the question, and I think this is a very important question. If you now saw yourself and there was your funeral, and you were, like you have with the casket, and it's going into the ground, and you were asked the question, what would you want the people that are there and the person giving the sermon to say about what you really cared about in your life and what you spent your time doing? And I was asked that question at one point. I've asked it of myself many times, but I was in a Navajo sweat lodge. The Navajo Indians are our biggest tribe in New Mexico, and I was in a Navajo sweat lodge with one of my staff members, but a small group of Navajos in a sweat lodge, very religious ceremony. And at one point they turned to me, they never prepared me or anything. They just said, tell us the three things that you care about the most and you'd like to see changed in the world the most. And it was almost that same question, and I was kind of taken back. And so I thought for I think almost a minute, and I said, we have too many wars. I'd like to be thought of as bringing peace to the world, trying to help in a peaceful way. The second was, and it deals with the word environment that's been used, is how do we live in harmony with the earth, with this planet that we're on? And I'm going to talk about each of these. And then third is the people who are vulnerable, the people that we live with, that are part of our society, part of our country, that are throughout the world, that many times for no cause that they have done or created or something along that line, they are in a very bad, suffering, awful situation. And I've always thought that a great country is measured by how it treats the vulnerable in its society. So I'm going to talk a little bit about each of those in terms of public policy and my public service. And I'm going to start with what Kozan said in terms of democracy, where I start. First of all, if you talk about a passionate issue you care about, and there are many, many more issues, you know, racial justice and child poverty, and you can, I'd ask all of you to think about the issue you're the most passionate about and that you want our democracy to do something about, whether it's the local level or the state level or at the federal level. And I would just tell you, the way we are structured today and the way our democracy has atrophied, the things that you wish and that you want, and the things you want to push to get us there, our democracy is so broken that unless we first reform our democracy, we're not going to be able to do the things to create this planet where we are taking care of the vulnerable, where we deal with climate change and the extinction crisis, and where we live in a more peaceful way with the other 193 countries in the world. So let me, at this point, just talk a little bit about what I've done on those issues, because I think it's a little instructive, and this is part of the background too, about how do you as a elected public servant, if you're interested in doing that or supporting one, as I told Roshi Joan earlier, as a US Senator, and I've been there for 12 years, at the end, I had 50 people who were working for me and helping carry out all of the things that I really care about passionately, including my constituents and representing the state of New Mexico and I've always been reminded, you're a United States Senator. So you don't only fight for your state, the US is in front of your name. So remember that. You're fighting for the United States of America in the world, and we're also all world citizens, as we all know, and we care about the planet and we care about the other countries and the people around the world. So first of all, for my years of public service, I've always had a passion for reform of our democracy. The idea that we can make it better, it can be more responsive, we can be more effective in terms of helping people, in terms of really reaching the core of what these issues are. And let me start with, and Kozan mentioned this, this is kind of the peak of what I've been working on in my career, is the last Congress 2 years ago, Nancy Pelosi had a bill, she called it H.R. 1, that's House Resolution 1. That means it's for her, she's the only one allowed to put in H.R. 1. They saved the first 10 numbers for the speaker. And so she puts in and she says, H.R. 1, that's our reform of democracy bill. And in the Senate this year, Senator Schumer is calling it Senate Resolution number 1. So it's an extensive bill to try to reform our democracy. It reforms the big money, which has taken over the lobbyists who spend all the money. It's dreadful how much money is involved. And in just a short generation or so since my father was in it, he'd had one fundraiser in a 2-year cycle, and that would be it. And now I can tell you most members of Congress spend hours and hours every day either fundraising or talking to people that have given the money and that they're knocking on the door and want some time. And we need to get back to how campaigns are funded at the level where the citizens fund them with small contributions. And we do that in this bill. The gerrymandering, the Senate rules, I mean, all of these things I've worked on for my whole life. Even when I was Attorney General, I remember a group of us said there was a Supreme Court case that led to Citizens United, and we deal with overturning Citizens United in this particular piece of legislation. And we said that the case of money being a First Amendment thing, and that you can't regulate it in any way in order to have a better political system. That came from a case called Buckley versus Vallejo. And as a state attorney general, I think about 25 of us wrote a letter and said that case should be overturned because it's headed down a path where money is the king in the system. And then our democracy functions more like an auction block. So I think, and I'm open for questions and discussion there, but I want to cover a couple of the other issues that I've talked about, the three other issues, and then maybe I think we're going to have time where Roshi, Joan, and I will be able to discuss a little and have a few questions and then go into the actual question session. So where are we in the world as being a peaceful nation? I worry very much that we are too much oriented towards engaging with other big powers and seem to be forgetting about what destruction happens and what horrible things happen to the lives of people in countries where this huge superpower, these huge superpower dynamics kind of converge and converge on a country. For example, Syria. Look at Syria. We now have a number of countries. We tried to do the right thing for Syria, we say. I actually, on the War and Peace front, I don't want you all to know I only voted once for going to war in Afghanistan. And after the 60 days when Bush didn't do what he said, I realized that was even a mistake because if you as a president say, I'm going to go to war in Afghanistan and I'm going to be there for 60 days, I'm going to achieve these objectives and then we're coming home, I think Afghanistan would be a lot better off if we had done that. And we'd let them work to, not withdrawn from the world, not supported them diplomatically, not worked with them closely to bring peace, but to stay there with troops. And now it's our longest war, and we don't really have the ability to end it, it seems. I mean, and I can't tell you how many times a number of members of Congress say, it's time, this is an endless war. And now we've had Republican and Democratic presidents both say, we don't care about endless wars. We don't want endless wars. And yet we're in a endless war situation in Afghanistan and several other places around the world. And the main point here is that Congress is not, on behalf of the people, stepping up to the plate and requiring a declaration of war before our military troops are put on the ground in other countries around the world. Because as soon as we put them there, it's much more complicated to extract them. And that's the troubling thing I've seen over 30 years. The only war that we really have ended in modern times with the Congress acting is Vietnam. And why did that happen? I think, you know, a lot of us, Roshi, Joan, and others here are of this Vietnam era. I mean, we grew up with the war. We understood the devastation of the napalm and the bombing and the fighting, and we had all these unrealistic fears that the domino theory and that China was going to take over the entire rest of the area, and those fears didn't get fulfilled. So anyway, my point here is that citizens can talk to their representatives and their senators and insist that Congress, on their behalf, always make sure if we're sending combat troops, it is done through a declaration of war. And we will see through history, as you all read the books and study this, that that Congress has abdicated for a long time, has given its authority over to the executive branch, which is to me a very unfortunate thing. But all of us as citizens and as in this broad term public servants can speak up and be engaged and say, isn't there a better way? Isn't it may well be that force is needed in the very last resort, but we should do all the other things before that. So enough of that, but I'd like to have a further discussion with any of you that may engage me there. Let me talk a little bit about the most vulnerable, because this has been part of my passion in elective service. I mean, one of the curious things to me, here we have taken care of our elderly and our senior citizens in a remarkable way in democracy. You know, in the Roosevelt era, 50% of elderly people were homeless. They were destitute. And Roosevelt said they've worked all their lives. They should have a system that supports them. And we've put in place since Roosevelt, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. We've done this incredible job at supporting the elderly. But then I asked the question, what have we done for our young people, the young people who are hungry, the young people who are in poverty, the young people that are disabled? And for the last figure I saw, every $9 that the federal government spends for a senior citizen, we spend $1 for a child. So the system's a little bit lopsided, in my opinion, because these kids are our future. These kids are who are going to come through the system. And they're the ones at this point that I have the hope in and the faith in that they can resolve some of these big issues that we're talking about here. So how do we deal with that? And why is that the seniors are in that situation and we've left behind the children? Well, first of all, senior citizens vote the most. You can once again see the political part of this. If you participate, if you're there and you get out and vote, you make your voice heard, then you have a result where there's a change and where there's a support system for people who really deserve it after they've worked their entire lives. And I hope in this in these coming years with the new administration we have, many people believe with a child tax credit of $3,600, we could cut child poverty in half. Child tax credit. That would go to families, many of whom don't pay taxes, and then they would have the ability to take care of their children, and those children would enter the school system ready to learn rather than falling behind from the beginning. So I think, once again, this is an area where I have worked on this, and I want to talk a little bit about one other group that is so much a part of America, but is so ignored, and that's Native Americans. I've been on all the committees and done all of that work, but think here for a minute when the colonial powers, Columbus, all of the folks, some of the Spanish that arrived in the United States, let's say starting back, 1491, before 1492, there was an incredible group of societies. Millions. People don't know, the estimates are in the tens or even higher than that. Millions of Native Americans living here on the continent. And they had sophisticated societies. They operated amongst each other. A lot of people believe that the way Native Americans worked with each other and organized themselves in a kind of a governmental structure was the start of us organizing the 13 colonies and having a group of colonies working with each other. that kind of thing. And to me, the remarkable thing, which flows over into the environment too, is they were living sustainably on the land. We had in the United States of America, not 200 years ago, not going back all the way, like I'm talking about the arrival of Columbus, 200 years ago on the Great Plains, which come here on the edge of New Mexico too, we had probably, the estimates are 60 million bison running wild and roaming across the plains. And Native Americans lived with them, traveled with them. Whenever they took a bison for their needs, they used every single bit of it, and they lived sustainably. And the only reason we don't have that American Serengeti today is the US government decided, in order to conquer Native Americans, in order to subdue them, we've got to kill the thing they live off of. And so that's why eventually the buffalo, the bison were extinguished. So we have, and you can imagine if that was going 200 years ago, they're only 100, 150 years from being completely ripped up and deracinated, pulled up by the roots from that society they had. And then I'm not going to go through all the mistreatment in terms of assimilation and what we did in boarding schools and not allowing them to speak languages and all of that, but incredibly, incredibly bad treatment and caused enormous, enormous suffering. So that's the vulnerable part, but there's so much more to be done. And I don't mean to suggest in any way when I talk of these three categories that there aren't many, many other categories that are just as large, whether it comes to African Americans or how Japanese Americans were treated in World War II, put into basically concentration camps, all of that kind of thing. But let me talk about the final issue that I want to hit on, and then I think we may be at the point that I want to engage with Roshi in a little discussion and Q&A too. The final issue, and we can call it environment in the broadest possible sense, call it conservation. But the issue to me that is crucial here is our planet is now headed into two dual crises, the climate crisis and the extinction crisis. We all know climate change. I don't need to spend a lot of time on that, but I think it's pretty doggone clear that unless we get on top of this very quickly, future generations are going to be living a much different life, much less diversity, much more troubling security situations. All of our national security, our intelligence people believe climate change is a national security threat to our country. If you just want to look from our country perspective, I think it's a national security threat to the world, and it's a threat to our planet. I don't have any doubt about that. But think also on extinction. We have a movement that started that I was the head on the bill. It's called 30 by 30. And what the movement is to do is save 30% of nature by 2030. This was a goal I didn't dream up out of the world. This was a goal that came from scientists around the world. They settled on with a scientist that wrote Half Earth, which is, and their goal was save 50% of nature, talking about nature and the oceans by 2050. And they said only if we do that do we have the structure to tackle climate change, because this is the Earth's lungs, is nature, our rainforest, all of the ways that nature absorbs carbon. So we are lucky that our current president has given an executive order on 30 by 30 to all of the federal government employees, and basically said to all of those employees. 30 by 30 is my goal. It's my organizing principle. And every day when you come to work, I want you to make sure that you're trying to get us there. And just to throw one little fact out to you, is we destroy every 30 seconds a football field's size of nature. So imagine, just think of yourself in a small community, and every 30 seconds a football field, your forest that's right next by, gone. Your wetland that's there that helps in so many ways purifying water and wildlife, gone. And you can see we're in a very, very difficult situation. So when I come forward with the democracy challenges and talk about these three issues, I may have hit a tone which is not optimistic as I would like to be. So I'm going to finish on this by just saying my hope resides in the young people that I see now, the people that are out in the streets on Black Lives Matter, that are out in the streets on climate, the young woman that at 14 years old was outside the parliament, who then ended up in Davos speaking to the world economic leaders. I mean, we have such a remarkable group of young people that have seen this as a real danger. And here, the societies at large around the world seem to be going on business as usual. Well, they aren't allowing that to happen. And that makes me very happy, because I think if we stay centered, if we stay focused, if all of us listen to them and we all come to the conclusion that we need to be engaged here, we need to be public servants in the very best term. And the one thing I forgot to say when I said public servant is at the beginning, I would call it altruistic public service or altruistic public servants. Why do I say altruistic? Because I've been in this a long time, and some people they are what I would call egotistical public servants. And so you can think of a lot of other names too, as far as in front, a description in front of a public servant. But what we want is a public servant who cares about others, has compassion for others, has compassion for the world, for the living world, all the living world that we want to be our community, not that we just strip of things to have more material possessions, but that move in that direction. So I know, Roshi Joan, we're 7-8 minutes before we get to the questions, and I know you had some specific issues you wanted me to cover. I didn't get to all of them, but I much rather, in giving talks, love to have a little bit of interaction. So I'm so glad we'll have this opportunity with you, and then with the people all on this Zoom call with us, or larger YouTube participation. Thank you.
Tom, thank you so much. I think we're all deeply moved by how you have manifested your values and also your family's values. I'm pretty sure I met your dad years ago, by the way. Good looking guy, I have to say. But what principles he lived by. Just an extraordinary person. Tom, what I'd like to do, and Kozan, if you would step in and help facilitate this, we have nearly 200 people of our community socially engaged Buddhist training program. I'd like to just take a few questions that you can reflect on from the wider community. And Noah, if you wouldn't mind stepping in and just instructing people how to raise their hands, so to speak, or to put questions in the chat stream, because I think we have a really extraordinary opportunity to explore with you. And as Noah, if you'll explain, but there's one piece I would really appreciate you addressing, Tom. And that is how you have reached across the aisle, how you have made visible common ground in a highly partisan environment, how you have fostered relationships of trust between members of Congress who have very divergent views. I'd like to know how you did that.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
I
Well,
think that's really important for us to understand.
yeah. Well, first of all, I'm going to just pick one issue, which is the issue of chemicals in our bodies. And just so you know, I was tested while I was in Congress, and I was found, they tested me for 150 industrial chemicals, and I had 75 in my body. And I asked the scientists who did the testing, and they said, that's what, most people living today have. If you go back 75 years, if they'd done that test, you wouldn't have found anything. So we're literally, in our ways we run our businesses and the ways, the things we acquire, the things we eat, the air we breathe, the water we drink, we are poisoning ourselves. And we had a law in place called TSCA. It was passed in the 70s. It's Toxic Substances Control Act. And it was so broken that the Environmental Protection Agency wouldn't even bring a case. And that had gone on for 25 years. And so I picked up the legislation that a wonderful Senator, Frank Lautenberg, he tried to reach a compromise across the aisle. I was on the committee. I was working with him. He died. And I picked up his bill and I said, we're going to, even though the chairman of the committee, she didn't like the bill and she was against me doing this. It was a Democrat that was opposed to it. And I said, how do we come together? So I went to the Republican, David Vitter. We had dinner in one of the restaurants up there on the Hill. And we didn't know each other very well at the time. After the dinner, we made a real connection. It was interesting. It was kind of like, I think, how we always think in our lives about compassion. I do anyway, think about compassion and love for yourself, but then you have to find that compassion to move at other levels with other people. And that's what I've always tried to do with other senators. Even though I see somebody who's so different than me, I say, there's got to be some really good things. They want to be happy. They want to be free from suffering. They want to live a life. So we have that in common. So why don't we try to focus on other things that we can work on together? Maybe that's the only thing we can work on together, but that would be a big change. And so we had that dinner and we shook hands at the end of the dinner and we said, we're going to get this done. We're going to reform TSCA and make it happen. And 3 years later, President Obama signed the law. But that 3 years were the most, for me, I was considered at the time, I had all this huge environmental capital. I was a Udall, Stuart Udall, incredible Interior Secretary, the beginning of the environmental movement, beginning of conservation. So I'd been doing all these great things, putting my name on bills, but I'd never weighed into something that was so difficult. And the environmental groups were terrified with the situation that I was going to sell them out, that I would get it to the point where I really was so into the legislation that it would be a bad bill. And so I was beat up more than any of the Republicans. And I remember Republicans coming to me and saying, I know how that feels. I've done that on other issues, but the only reason we can move this bill forward and get this done is because you're taking all the arrows and we're able to then move forward and work with you to try to make the bill better. This is a bill, when I picked it up for Frank Lautenberg, that wasn't the greatest bill, but we moved it way, way until at the end, the person that supervised the Toxic Chemicals Agency told me at the end of the day, and he'd studied the laws all over the world, he said, this is the best law for protecting the public from chemicals of any place in the world, even REACH, which is the European law. So I don't know, that's a very long-winded way around it, Joan, but Joan, what you find out is you stand on your principle. I didn't get everything I wanted. You stand on your principle. You don't ever give up your principles. But when you stand your ground, you also have to try to find common ground. And that's really what you do in a legislative body. It's what you do if you're an executive. You declare what your principles are, but most of the time, they're not going to give you a bill. A legislature's not going to give a president or a governor or the mayor the exact bill they want. And so at that point, you then have to engage through the process and then decide, well, is this common ground move us forward enough that I can support it, or then I have to be in opposition? And I think that's a lot of what all of us do sometimes in our daily lives. Certainly we do it in our marriages all the time.
Oh, beautiful. Thank you. It reminds me very much of John Paul Lederach's view about the moral imagination. I don't know if you know his work. He's a great peace builder. And, he speaks exactly in the way that you do. He says, take your opponent out for a cup of coffee, so to speak. Yeah. It's all about building relationship. And as you said, Senator, it is about looking for common ground to understand even the most odd politician, so to speak, still that is a human being. I want to be, I want to take one question from our community here while YouTube is still with us, and then our YouTube community will drop away, and then we'll have a few more questions from our community of the socially engaged Buddhist training. Kozan?
Yeah. So it looks like Marina Colby, you have your hand up. We love, I'm going to unmute you, or I'm going to try and unmute you. I think you have to, there we go.
There we go.
And if we could pin Maria, that would be great.
Well, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to ask a question. Senator Udall, I'm very inspired by your public service. And my question, as I sit here in Washington, D.C., I actually work for the federal government. I see Congress really, I think the whole world sees Congress split, really divided. And so I'm just wondering, just some insights or feedback from you in relation to where would you, like for people who aren't politicians, where would you put your effort at the federal level, national level, local level, or even where I think there may be even faster progress would be at the international or multilateral level, where we could use the current administration and the priorities that they're setting.
Yeah. Well, Marina, first of all, I want everybody to understand and this has always been the case in all my years of public service, 30 years looking at the Congress has always been divided. Even in a more bipartisan age with my father back in the 50s, the Congress you still had two sides taking political positions, and it's understandable the division because all of the ideas and all of the passion, this is the focal point, the Congress. It comes to that point. So we should never be discouraged if there is division. What we want is honest, altruistic public servants that are seeking that common good. on the issues they care about, and many times it's because their constituents care about them. And never forget that if you're a constituent of a member of Congress, you live in their district, if it's a House member, you live in senator, a phone call and engagement with staff, tremendously important to those members. And so you've heard the three big, the four. First, I start with the overarching issue, and I'm kind of repeating here, reform of our democracy. And then you've got to tick through climate change and the extinction crisis. You can obviously pick a number of different categories of people and people in situations who are vulnerable and who have been wronged from past behavior. And then you talked international, the war and peace situation, where unfortunately I think the United States is not working with other countries. I think you're going to see a lot more in the current administration, where just like under President Obama, we become part of a multinational effort. And so whenever anything goes wrong in the country, the first thing we're going to do is say, what are the security operations and apparatus and mechanisms that are in place? And how do we support those? And how do we get the diplomacy in there? I don't think we should be in a position where we say the United States of America understands every country around the world, and every time they have a little problem, we become the world's policeman and get into it. We're much better off, in my opinion, trying to reinforce what's happening at the local level. And what really, in all the authorizations of force and the conflicts we've gotten into that I've been so disenchanted with, it usually starts where the European countries tell us not to do it. They say they've had colonial history with some of these countries. They say, don't go in and do that. That's not a good idea. Work with us. We have diplomats there. We think we can work through these issues. And we always think in many circumstances, I shouldn't say always, but we have this idea that we know what is best. And I think you can see in these current situations like Syria and Yemen and Afghanistan and Iraq, I think there are better ways to proceed. I really believe there are better ways to proceed.
Yeah. Thank you, Senator. I'm going to just transition us. Noah's going to facilitate the kind of closing of our public live YouTube. So everyone who's joined us for our Wednesday evening Dharma talk, thank you for being with us. We're going to close that part of our session tonight. So thank you, everyone.